This isn't a regulatory issue, this is a democracy issue. Citizens United effectively disallows states and the people to create regulations as they see fit.
We, the people, have the right and the responsibility to regulate how money is used to influence election outcomes. There's these moments in American history, just like ours right now, where Americans, we learn from each other, we share stories, we shared practices, we shared tactics, and we unite around an objective. Yeah, we actually got to do this big thing.
I mean, one of the things I really respect and love about this effort is that to be successful, you're going to have to build a political movement that breaks through the narrative that we're a hopelessly divided country, that we're a red-blue country, that people, are at each other's throats, which I think is a false narrative. Hello, everybody. Thank you for making time on a late Friday afternoon. Not the easiest thing in the world. I'm very excited to talk today with Jeff Clements. Jeff, many of you, I'm sure know, he's the president of American Promise. He's also the author of Corporations Are Not People, Reclaiming Democracy from Big Money and Global Corporations. He's a lawyer. He actually served as the Assistant Attorney General and Chief of the Public Law Enforcement Bureau in the AG's office in Massachusetts. Really excited to talk with you, Jeff. Before we dive into questions, I actually just want to show a quick video clip of you talking at a recent Brennan Center event. So Russ, take it away.
So I didn't set out to amend the Constitution. I did a brief in the Citizens United case, and the Supreme Court went out to Montana to help Steve Bullock, AG at the time, defend Montana's anti-corruption laws after Citizens United. That was struck down without a hearing. Montana's Supreme Court, we won in 8-1. Think of the implications of federalism and respect for the judiciary when it goes up to the Supreme Court, summarily reversed by the Supreme Court with no hearing for the state that lost an anti-corruption law that they'd had for 100 years, and 24 other states had the same law. What happened next, though, was new to me in my career. Within 2 weeks, 40,000 Montana people signed on to an initiative to put the question to the ballot. Was the Supreme Court wrong? Should they instruct, which they like to do out west, instruct their congressional delegation to get a constitutional amendment to enable the states and Congress within their respective jurisdictions to regulate money in elections? Within no time, it was on the ballot. The governor's a Democrat. The Republican was the lieutenant governor was a Republican. And that year was 2012. Mitt Romney beat Barack Obama in Montana by 12 points. This ballot initiative did get on the ballot. It passed 75% to 25%, calling for a constitutional amendment. That's a constitutional conversation that I thought was really interesting.
Boy, that's really fascinating, and I'm hoping you'll share a little more details of that effort. Jeff, tell us, I have a million questions, but tell us briefly about American Promise, how you came to create the organization, and what the mission is.
Sure, John. Thank you, and it's so good to be here with you, my friend and colleague on the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, and other great work. Big admirer of the open primaries campaign and effort. Part of, I think, what is going to be recognized in history as a wave of reform that Americans pull off, including American Promise's work around the constitutional amendment to deal with money in politics, things like ranked choice voting, open primaries. It's how we're going to get the country back on track. So, John, thanks. Such a pleasure to be here and to see some friends on the call. And some American Promise folks on the team and our volunteers. So they might weigh in with some links in the chat to help me out if they have something pertinent. But what American Promise is doing is nothing less than helping Americans to unite to amend our Constitution, the Constitution of the United States, to say that we, the people, have the right and the responsibility to regulate how money is used to influence election outcomes. It's not the exact words. Somebody at American Promise can put the exact words into the chat if you want, but the beauty of this, it's the First Amendment in the digital age. So we can, improve the proposed language through conversations with the American people, which we have done in a project we call Writing the 28th Amendment. So if you have feedback on it, plenty of time to weigh in. But we're serious about getting this done. The people of Montana started it, as you saw in that clip. They taught me. I was a constitutional lawyer. It hadn't occurred to me that when the Supreme Court decides a case, like the cases that the Supreme Court did decide to basically, change the meaning of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, to empower the powerful to spend unlimited money. And by powerful, I mean whether it's a billionaire, a corporation, a union, or even now foreign governments are running money into our elections, and basically drown out the real voices of the real people. You basically turn the Constitution upside down, and nothing less than an amendment can fix it because it's a constitutional ruling. And so we decided, I came back from Montana. I came back from a book tour about that book John mentioned. I'd been in every state. I'd been talking to Americans around the country. I had been in, so-called red states and blue states. I don't buy that anymore. I'd been in rural areas, urban areas, and wherever I went, it was like what we saw in Montana. Overwhelming recognition of the constitutional crisis. They didn't necessarily call it that, but they were saying, we have no voice. Government doesn't listen to us. It's completely corrupted. You can't trust the elections anymore. We're dominated by outside forces. The parties are basically, money laundering for big donors rather than representative of interests among the people. And so it was clear that this was something that we could actually do. And I say it like that because, constitutional amendments don't come along every day. But when they come, we tend to do them a lot. So we did 4 amendments between 1961, 1971. We did 4 amendments between 1910 and 1920. So there's these moments in American history, just like ours right now, where Americans, we learn from each other, we share stories, we share practices, we share tactics, and we unite around an objective. Yeah, we actually got to do this big thing, whether it's open primaries or amending the Constitution, just like we've done before. So American Promise was created to actually serve that need. So this is the only thing we do. We're on a mission. We're going to get this amendment to empower the states, empower the people, empower our representatives to pass effective regulation of how money is used in the political system, to reconnect elections and representatives and government to the people and to be accountable to the people. So we need a 2/3 vote in Congress, ratification in 3/4 of the states. That's how hard it is, but we've made incredible progress because American Promise is a mission focus. There's no secret agenda. This is all we do. So we can actually unite. We have Republicans, independents, Democrats working in all 50 states, driving state campaigns. And now Montana was one of the first, but 22 states are actually on board this amendment formally, thanks to millions of voters who've gotten behind us. So we can get this done, and that's what American Promise and our many allies are helping to do. So we can really make history and help turn the situation in this country around.
That's great. I read the amendment, the For Our Freedom Amendment. That's the official name of it. Am I right?
That's right. That's our official name. Spread the word. Yeah.
One thing that I realized, I was looking at your work with a whole set of assumptions that were wrong. And one of the things that I had thought before I really did some homework was that American Promise was advocating for a constitutional amendment to put certain types of regulations into the Constitution. And I'm like, no, that's not what they're doing. They're saying that Citizens United effectively disallows states and the people to create regulations as they see fit. You're in some ways saying, look, we the people should have the right to do this. And I was very impressed by that. And said, oh, this isn't a regulatory issue. This is a democracy issue. So I just want you to know, one of the benefits of this Zoom call is I had to do some homework.
Yeah. Hey, John, we all have to do homework. I said before we got on, I learned a lot about, open primaries isn't some wonky campaign, issue. It's about the rights of the people. Like you shouldn't
Yeah,
have to join a party in order to be enfranchised and to vote, And so I think we're all learning from each other. And that's the beauty of this work. And on the constitutional amendment, you're absolutely right. Constitutions are not about policy so much as
right.
about who has power. It's about distribution of that power to ensure that self-government can actually work. It's about the role of the states versus the federal government. It's about our rights, and it opens with we the people, and that's really real. I mean, it's amazing how much of what we take for granted, women voting, no slavery, due process, equal protection, 18, 19, 20-year-olds voting, electing senators, all of those were amendments. None of that came out of Philadelphia. It was all amendments. So we the people is literal, and we have to relearn that. And then when you're trying for an amendment, you actually have to make it constitutional language, not put your favorite policy. I have, some ideas I'd like to see if we had a choice to actually, protect our elections and our rights with regulations. I have my ideas, but that doesn't matter. What matters is, what Oklahoma people want to do in Oklahoma, and Texas people want to do in Texas, and New Yorkers want to do in New Yorkers, and I trust them. They'll get it right. They don't want to be dominated by oligarchs. So this is constitutional language. It's about
Yeah.
power. It's about rights. It's about reconnecting to the people, not about favorite policies. The one time they tried policies in an amendment, it was prohibition. It didn't work so well.
That's true. While I'm in revealing my biases mode, one of the reasons we've known each other for years, and I've always had a great deal of respect for you. And as you mentioned, we've been on a board together, the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. But I've always been very skeptical of campaign finance reform as a broad topic. And I'll tell you why. I'm an independent. I've been active in independent alternative politics for 33 years. And one of the things you learn as an independent is that the Democratic Party justifies their exclusion of independence, their discrimination against independence, their pushing independence into the background by saying like, oh, the real reform that we need is campaign finance reform. They never do anything about it. They're as awash in money as the Republicans. But I always was like, oh, when I hear someone say campaign finance reform, the way I interpret it is Democrat trying to keep the independents out and say, oh no, we need this kind of reform, not to empower you independents. And I must say, learning more about American Promise, diving into what you're actually doing, learning about the organizing that you're doing, it was like breathing, exhaling for the first time in 33 years to see someone tackling this issue that's not a partisan Democrat looking to stomp their foot on the head of independence. So that's just my little confession here. So my question is to you, are you pushing through that? Are you engaging that? How do you, everything in America gets partisanized. How are you in your organizing for this, building that kind of broad tent, bringing together people from the left and the right, from the parties, independents? What's that experience like for you and your team?
Well, that is the, let's say, $28 question or something for the 28th Amendment. We absolutely have to do it. It's a strategic imperative.
Right. Because you need 3/4 of a vote in Congress.
It's 2/3 of Congress, and then 3/4 of the state legislatures to ratify. So if you're not serious about that question, you're not serious about amending the Constitution. And if you're not serious about amending the Constitution, you're not serious about actually restoring elections and representation to the people, because it's a runaway freight train right now with money, global corporations owned by sovereign funds of other countries. Now we have AI coming. So we are serious about fixing the problem, and that imposes strategic discipline. So we have to actually do the work to overcome perceptions like that. And there's perceptions on the other side. There's, you're saying as an independent what you think of Democrats. Wait till you talk to the Republicans, as we do all the time, about what they think, and then go vice versa when you're having Democrats and trying to work with Republicans, and there's just a lot of sort of distrust and assumptions, and we overcome it by not trying to tell people what to think, but empowering them to speak for themselves. So let me give you an example. Last week, we filed testimony in the U.S. House that had a hearing around elections and money and free speech. And the testimony came from two Republicans, Senator Jim Rubins, a state senator, a Liberty Republican, pretty independent. He came in as part of the Reform Party a long time ago, but now a Republican. And he's in New Hampshire, and up in Maine, Senator Rick Bennett, a Republican. And they were explaining why we need this constitutional amendment to save federalism in the states, to save free speech. So we empower people to speak for themselves, and that builds trust, because then people are hearing each other. I see my friend Ann Drum in Dallas, Texas, one of our great volunteer leaders. Thank you, Ann, for being here and all you do. She's on this call. She will tell you how hard it is if you're on the sort of left side of the spectrum in Texas to work with Republicans, and she does it. And so we had this great work at the Dallas Chamber of Commerce with the former mayor of Dallas, a Republican, and that Ann pulled together. So it's hard work, but you have to do it. And it's one of the reasons we founded American Promise, and it's totally in the DNA to actually be the place where you can do that. We talk openly about some of the differences, and that's okay. We can have these differences because we have one big thing we really agree on that is about the country and the future. And that, Pauline, I think, keeps everybody from letting the differences get out of control. And John, to your point, I think we have to overcome some assumptions about campaign finance that are kind of 1990s battles. John, really there. It's a whole new ball game. And just to put my own cards on the table and to tell you that I'm as old as you, John. My first vote for president was John Anderson in 1980, who was on the national ticket as an independent, and I remain an independent today. So I get it, believe me. And we call out the Democrats, we call out the Republicans, but mostly we call for Americans to go look forward and let's get this right and fix it. And then we can go back to fighting about what campaign finance rules are best. But let's join together to get our power back.
What are like, I think of Common Cause, for example, as kind of a legacy organization that came out of the Nixon era, when, corruption was seen as, a shady mobster delivering a suitcase full of cash under the table. And that's kind of stuck in my head as like the problem of money in politics. But like, what are some of the older organizations that have worked on this issue? How are they relating to your effort? Are they in favor of it? Are they neutral? Are they gung-ho? Like, what are they against it? What are they saying?
I won't speak for them. We have friends across the spectrum and in all organizations. So, and I wouldn't want someone speaking for American Promise, and you wouldn't want someone speaking for open primaries. But I will speak from my experience in working with them. And I think you are right. There's some organizations that came out of that era, which was another reform era at the time, and so Common Cause, Public Citizen is another one. They're very much on board this constitutional amendment. They have been supportive of it since the beginning of the post Citizens United response. They had worked hard for McCain-Feingold, the law that got struck down by the court. So they did step up for a constitutional amendment solution. But in my experience, and again, they can speak for themselves and their members can speak for themselves, they have a lot of those kind of organizations over a 40 or 50-year history have a lot of things on their plate, a lot of different stuff. And sometimes that means that, they are in effect ending up on partisan sides of those battles over things. And then, of course, with the election of 2016, we experienced certainly a sort of reaction on the sort of center left and left, and others to the election of President Trump that I think made it sort of less, in some ways, open space for the American promise kind of conversation,
Right.
because they had other priorities. But
Got
I
it.
think they're supportive, and they're, I'm sure, very helpful to holding the support among Democrats, even as Democrats find and insist, quite understandably, they're not going to unilaterally disarm. So Democrats have gotten very good at the big money game, the dark money game, just as Republicans have. And so it's good that, there's organizations on the left and organizations on the right, and American Promise, hopefully holding it all together with a strategy that can get it over the finish line.
That's good to hear. One of the things that really kind of struck me as I was learning more about what you're doing is that one of the consequences of Citizens United is that we, the people, and our elected representatives, we don't have the ability to, tell me if I'm getting this right, to respond to all kinds of new emerging forms of political, I don't know, call it campaigning, call it manipulation. So AI, foreign interference in our elections, offshore, accounts that are they're not people, that we can't engage those things. And when I read AI in one of your reports, I'm like, oh wow, that's like a whole new thing that nobody knows where AI is going. And to be in a situation where we have no way of addressing that, or coming up with regulations for it, whether they're good regulations or bad, we're not allowed to, really struck me as a dangerous situation, given what's going on in the country and in the world, and this technology that no one has figured out. What is that a big part of this conversation? The whole kind of foreign and AI and new forms of crypto life that's out there?
It absolutely is, and more and more. We talked about the old sort of 90s impressions about campaign finance, and unfortunately, that's the world the Supreme Court lives in, and that's why I think that's why we ended up in what is now not a campaign finance crisis, but I think an existential constitutional crisis about whether government of the people can actually survive in a world like that. Because if you just think about it, you mentioned the bags of cash, from a mobster or something. You've got digital currency that can move around the world in a second. You've got, this used to be a problem in the sort of robber baron era with railroads or oil companies, and those were American companies run by Americans. You now have Saudi sovereign funds of other countries being the number one shareholder in some of these global companies, able to spend money in our elections, and we're not allowed to do anything about it, literally not allowed to do anything about it, because the Supreme Court says that's free speech. Doesn't matter that it's a corporation, a global corporation. That same logic applies to any speech or information. So if you can have a global corporation running a digital operation, now you're going to have AI digital operations, AI information, creating basically the entire information space that voters get, or misinformation space. And we're told there's nothing we can do about that. Foreign money technically is illegal still. If a foreign entity or an intel operation did try to put money directly into a campaign, it would not only be a scandal, it would be a criminal offense and prosecuted. The problem is the Supreme Court has disabled our ability to do what you would do in the banking world, do what you would do with, assault and battery or murder, which is have guardrails so that when it happens, you can prevent it from happening in the first place. And when it happens, you can detect it and prosecute it. It is easy now, and they're doing it for foreign intel operations to create just digital campaigns and layers of LLCs and C4s, and nobody knows where the money comes from until it ends up in a nice sounding super PAC. that's spending the money, and
Huh.
nobody could trace the money. You've got foreign-owned corporations, one in Maine, where we have an active ballot campaign called Protect Maine Elections. 100% government-owned Canadian company spent $24 million last year to influence the outcome of a ballot initiative in Maine. 100% foreign-owned, and they wanted to run a energy corridor through the state. So basically took over the debate and with foreign money. The CEO of that company from Canada came down to explain herself to the state legislature. Senator Rick Bennett, I mentioned, he asked her, could you do this in Canada? And she said, oh no, our elections are serious. Our elections are serious affairs for the
Oh,
citizens.
wow.
So, like, what are our elections, right?
That's deep.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's really serious. So we are literally told we can't do anything about it. And if we can't do anything about it, I don't know that any human society has ever survived as a republic by saying whoever has the most cash gets to make the rules or speak loudest. That doesn't usually work for self-government of equal citizens.
Got it. We're going to open it up for questions in about 3 or 4 minutes. Again, if you want to ask a question, just go to the chat, type your name, your state, and a one-sentence summary of what you want to ask, and then I'll call on you and you can ask your question. We're going to open it up in just a few minutes. Jeff, a couple final questions. So, one of the things we did in Alaska was pass a referendum that combined dark money disclosure, not a constitutional change, just a form of more transparency, with open primaries and ranked choice voting. Are you encountering a kind of an appetite for, as you're doing your organizing for the constitutional amendment, for kind of comprehensive solutions, broader solutions? Is that, I see benefits and weaknesses to that approach. I'm not pushing it. But what are you running into in terms of what people are talking about on the ground?
So let me go back to Alaska for a second. Little known fact, there was actually a constitutional amendment in that language in that law that was passed by the voters of Alaska that also did ranked choice voting, open primaries, and dark money disclosure. Because Alaska, even though it would like to, was prohibited from having rules for outside money, meaning coming from outside Alaska, because that's a big issue there, where they're dominated by outside money like that. Their laws having lower limits for that kind of money were struck down. They would like, and I think many Alaskans would like to have this constitutional solution. So they put it into the findings of that law. We worked with the Alaskans for Better Elections campaign on that. And there were findings saying, we have the constitutional right to do this. We call on Congress to get this amendment back to the states for ratification. So it wasn't specifically the law of Alaska, because it couldn't be, but those kind of resolutions are passing at the state level, the local level. And so I think it's a question that, we don't usually drop in and tell the voters in a state how to do it. We are about empowerment of voters and education of voters, and then working on good strategies with partners. And sometimes that means, hey, the voters want open primaries, or they want ranked choice voting, they want to support this amendment. Let's put them together and take it to the people and let the people decide. And we're always game. We're always game for that. I think it's, but I think you're also right that, not everyone who loves ranked choice voting will necessarily want to work on money in politics. More importantly, for our strategy, which is holding everybody together, holding this, 86% of Republicans, along with 86% of Democrats, say money in politics is the number one threat to American democracy. So for whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you don't like it, ranked choice voting, we'd rather sometimes not have our 86% go to 50%, because we're making them have something they love with something they're not sure about. So we don't decide that. It's a case by case basis, but I do think it's about listening to the people who live where the action is. So if it's a state or a local initiative, listen to the people. They know what to do and what works. So that's our approach.
Yeah, got it. I mean, one of the things I really respect and love about this effort is that to be successful, you're going to have to build a political movement that breaks through the narrative that we're a hopelessly divided country, that we're a red blue country, that people, are at each other's throats, which I think is a false narrative. But you can't just say it's a false narrative. You have to build something that shows that it's not that it is a false narrative. And I really appreciate that you've taken on such a Herculean task. Because if you're successful, or even in the doing it, you're showing that this kind of Washington view of America is not the only way to look at things. There's a lot more going on. There's a lot more commonality among Americans. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions here. We're going to start with Jack Charbonneau in Kansas City. He has a question about the tactic that you're pursuing here. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, and more of the process, I guess, that you're pursuing. So, are you going with the congressional method of an amendment process, or were you seeking the constitutional convention? In my opinion, I think both can work together in parallel, especially when it comes to removing the money from elections. You can have a process where the people can actually work toward writing the wording of what they want to have, and Congress can work to create the structure that would actually make that process happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's right, Jack. And Jack's referring to the two methods described in Article 5 of the Constitution for amending it. One method, so you need to both have the amendment proposed, and then it needs to be ratified. It's a two-step process. To propose an amendment, you need to get 2/3 of Congress to vote to propose it, or there's another method described. You can get 2/3 of the states to call a convention, and the convention would then propose the amendment. In either case, it would go out for ratification in the states themselves. So all 27 of our amendments, from the Bill of Rights to 18, 19, 20-year-olds voting, and the 26th Amendment and others, all of them were proposed by a 2/3 vote in Congress and then ratified in 3/4 of the states. But as Jack suggests, amendments are not like a linear process, and we do not rule out any, and we are welcome and endorse the efforts of Americans to learn and push every lever to do this hard lift of a constitutional power shift back to the people from where it's been stolen, essentially. And so there are groups, our colleagues at Wolfpack, another organization, are pushing on the convention route. They, to say a convention should be called by 2/3 of the states to propose this amendment. We actually see our path, a very good path, the 290 votes in the House and 67 in the Senate, and think we're going to get this out of Congress. But, it doesn't hurt that some are pushing for a convention, because you want to see Congress vote on it. It'll be when they see a convention coming, they're not going to want that, and they'll vote this amendment out. So again, you can waste a lot of energy arguing about which path, just like there's always internal politics of our various reforms, or people arguing about which strategy is the best. And the American Promise approach is, hey, we have our strategy, but we have humility to know that, maybe someone else has a better one, and we're not going to start fighting about tactics when we're on the same side about the goal.
Yeah, it's nice to see all the Republican states that are coming out asking for the convention, and now you've got Governor Newsom in California talking about a convention now. So we're all starting to come to the same point. It'll be fun to see who pushes who first. So
right,
good to hear.
All right, we're going to go to Kip Froelich in the Sunshine State. He has two very interesting questions. Go ahead, Kip.
John, well, you've covered the partisan part quite a bit, but I'm still perplexed, Jeff, because you kind of laid out that there's challenges on both sides and you got to work both sides and so forth. But my impression had been with Citizens United, given the makeup of the Supreme Court and the votes that result in that decision, and given the outrage that you heard in the liberal leading media outlets across the country and not in the conservative ones, that the disappointment in Citizens United is far more strong on the left-leaning part of our country. If that's not the case, I'd like to hear that, because just from seeing the media coverage then and still to this day, it's definitely a problem on one side. It appears to be more than the other. But I'd like to hear that if that's not the case, and there's a lot of outrage about Citizens United in the part of the Republican Party and the Republican operatives, that would be interesting news.
Yeah, Kip, I'm so glad you asked that. Thank you, because there is interesting news indeed. And you're right about the beginning of this. So we're about 10 years into this, the first decade after Citizens United, where the super PAC era has happened. We now have $500 million Senate races, $600 million Senate races. We have, $20 billion national elections. We have all the the kind of thing, problems we've been talking about. This is just the beginning. So initially, it was a conservative court decision. And the Republicans had the head start. Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was at the time, Majority Leader, was ready to go. And they got the head start back in 2012 on the sort of super PAC game. But the Democrats have caught up, and the problems about this have come home to roost so much. And it's impacting conservative issues like federalism and localism and free speech and a lot of, just practically speaking, if you're a Republican politician, they're losing elections over it. So the Wisconsin Supreme Court race was the most recent, where tons of outside money, including dark money, from all over the country came in, and the progressive candidate won. That's the way the game's going to be played. And so now there's an opportunity, and Republicans are taking it to say that we don't like this. We want to change. We want an amendment. And so it's why, we don't actually talk about Citizens United much. We don't talk about the Supreme Court much. That's old news. That's 10 years ago. It's the Supreme Court. When you do a constitutional amendment, the Supreme Court's on the sidelines. They have no role to play. Eight amendments have nullified Supreme Court decisions. The Supreme Court decided women don't have a right to vote, and many other examples where amendments just moved forward, and nobody remembers, Minor versus Happersett. That was the name of the case that said women have no right to vote, right? Someday no one will remember Citizens United. They'll remember the horror show that it caused, and they'll remember the 28th Amendment for our Freedom Amendment that fixed it. And so the worst strategy is to start with Citizens United with Republican conversations. Because think about it, if it's the other way, you got to, my guys on the court were wrong. And, that's not what it's about. It's like, start with the problem where they're there, start with the 86% of Republicans who really want to overturn that whole doctrine that, as someone said in the chat, goes back 40 years. It wasn't just Citizens United. It led to that. So, Republicans are passionate about this now. I'm going to tell you a secret about our co-sponsor in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of support in the legislature. One of them is Doug Mastriano. He's about as far right as you can get. He ran for governor. So the populist right. We've been at CPAC. Our Republican supporters have been at CPAC. They've been on Newsmax. There's a passion among Republicans that has caught up to the passion among Democrats and independents. Literally, if you look at the polls, you look at how people voted, you just go out and talk to them. They want this done. But our enemies, the first thing they will do is try to make it partisan. They'll try to spin the narrative that, oh no, this was a free speech decision of a conservative court that the Democrats don't like. We can't let them do that, because that's not true. And so I'm not blaming you, Kip. That was the early narrative, but it's really been superseded, and we have a huge opportunity to take this new narrative that 86% of Americans, literally 86% of, maybe we can get those links in the chat to those polls, and the Pew Research survey that now has reducing money in politics. This is a survey that Pew Research does year after year for decades about what are the most important issues for Americans. What do they want fixed right now? And the economy is always at the top. Reducing money in politics has never been at the top. It's at the top now. It's ahead of crime. It's ahead of immigration. It's ahead of climate. It's ahead of budget. People really get it. And so our job is to allow those Republicans, allow those independents, allow those Democrats to actually act on what they think and feel passionate about and get this fixed, not go back and re-debate Citizens United. So good question, Kip. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. That's encouraging.
Those numbers are pretty astounding, Jeff. I'm going to go next to the distinguished Michael Otten from New York. Go ahead, Mike.
I'll simplify the question. I just wanted to ask if the approach you're taking, Jeff, is also going to address Buckley versus Valeo, which is constitutionally protected independent spending and is really the stronger basis for what the super PACs do, even though everyone always talks just about Citizens United.
Yeah, Mike, I agree. I guess you must have been the one in the chat I saw, because as I said, it really does go back 40 years. Buckley versus Valeo was an early Supreme Court case in the 1970s addressing some of the post-Watergate reforms that were dealing with the money scandals of the day. And the seed of the sort of independent spending notion, and that, you know, you have to have only basically bags of cash, quid pro quo corruption, the court called it, can be regulated. So that is true. This was not just Citizens United. I think Citizens United was the wake-up call and put the problem on steroids. But that's another, you know, there's a lot of legal history on it that we could get into. Just like most constitutional struggles and battles have a lot of Supreme Court cases that are kind of imposing a status quo that Americans don't accept anymore. Whether it's, you know, equal marriage, whether it's you know, women voting, whether those are basically, all those went many years where the Supreme Court is saying one thing until it becomes intolerable and the people fix it with an amendment. That's where we are. So, you know, I'm not disagreeing at all with you, Michael, that Buckley versus Valeo is certainly relevant. But in terms of what we do now, it's about moving forward. We got a good constitutional solution in the 4-Hour Freedom Amendment. We can put it into place and leave the cases that got us into trouble to the dustbin of history.
Keep on going. You're on the right track.
Thank you.
We're going to go now to Marie in New Jersey, who has a question about the impact on lobbying. Go ahead, Marie.
Hi, Jeff. I just figured I'd got to get this one in for you. Our language in the amendment specifically talks about curtailing contributions and spending in ballot measures, campaigns, and elections. Can you address how the amendment addresses the power of money in lobbying, like big pharma, big tobacco, big oil, so on and so forth?
Yeah, thanks, Marie. And Marie is another one of our super volunteers, leaders, and great to hear you. Dr. Marie to us, she's a doctor and is helping build out our healthcare network and a lot of other great work. So thanks, Marie. You know, the lobbying question is interesting. Often you'll see how much is spent on lobbying, and we have an accurate perception that those with lots of money and big corporate interests have lobbyists who never stop, and it's sort of overwhelming. We aren't going after lobbying per se. I think the corrupt part of lobbying is when it's linked to the money in politics problem. So, you know, having a paid advocate to bring information before legislators isn't the problem if they're bringing information. It's more the problem that I heard from a legislator who I won't name, who said the lobbyists come in and they say, you know, we're really sorry you're not with us. We heard there's a super PAC out there. We're going to try to stop them, but they're running this ad, and then they'll show them some like horror show ad that's a complete attack and destruction of their character. And they say they're talking about spending millions. We think we can stop them if you get on board with us on this issue, but you know, they're pretty hopped up about it. And so it's that link to the money that gives lobbyists the power and the inappropriate power and access. So that if there was just ideas that they're bringing before and debate about that, that's not the issue. The issue is when the leverage that lobbyists have is so overwhelming, and you know, they're fundraising at the same time. It's like, hey, good to see you at the fundraiser last week, and their brother is running the super PAC for the. So it's the whole corrupt swamp part of lobbying that we think the amendment can actually address pretty well. Again, we'll need laws in place after we have the power with the amendment to do it. But lobbyists could be effectively regulated to be lobbyists, not extortionists or effectively bribers, which is what we have now. Not all of them, and I'm not talking about the individuals, but the system we have now is lobbying is a combination of bribery and extortion, like other pieces of the system, like super PACs and other things.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have so many great questions. Jeff, I want you to put on your philosophical hat for one moment, because Alan from Kansas is about to blow your mind. Go ahead, Alan.
I know Alan. He always blows my mind.
I don't know if I'll blow your mind, but my question is philosophical, I suppose. But is it possible that the huge influx of this dark money, which floods our airwaves with anonymous, hyper-partisan attack ads, is actually the source of our recent polarization? And I mean to say, is it possible that this political dysfunction isn't exactly what they're paying for?
So full disclosure, you're getting some thumbs up here, Alan. Full disclosure, Alan is on our American Promise staff team. So this is
okay. So you're a ringer. Okay, I didn't know. I did not know.
No, but this is not a ringer question. Because I actually got to know Alan. We met at the Unrig Summit before that. He's fifth generation Kansas farmer, combat veteran, total patriot who's with American Promise because he deeply believes in this cause. So, and the question is interesting, and it's one of the and he's run for Congress. So we're really glad to have Alan on the call and on the American Promise team, of course. So the question is an important one because I think it is a tactic. They call it free speech about spending money, but the money isn't actually spent on expressing the policy view that the people prefer, who are providing the money. So you're dumping the money in to get power. And the way you get power is by, using it to win elections. And the way people are winning elections now is antagonizing your voters, scaring the hell out of them, making them enraged, making them feel like you have to defeat the whatever on the other side who are just trying to destroy you, your family, your children, and your country. Right. That's and then that's part of the money. Both sides are doing that. So they're trying to hype up their voters, quote unquote. They think of their voters, right? Their base. And they're trying to basically disenfranchise and discourage and depress the vote on the other side. So 90% of the super PAC money is on those kind of, negative attacks. And it is intended to tear us apart. It's absolutely intended to tear us apart. It's not about informed debate for the voters to consider. And it is working. And now it's like constant. It used to be an election cycle. Now it's just constant. I heard somebody describe it, and since you wanted here's a philosophical fancy word. I'm not even sure what it means, but it sounds bad. He said epistemological warfare of some Americans against other Americans.
I like it. I mean, it's dirty, but I like the word epistemological. We have a question from John Fixstall in South Dakota about how you're going to get this done. Go ahead, John.
Hi, Jeff. I'm all in with you on this. This is just great. I assume many here, are terrified at the prospect of a constitutional convention right now with our nation in the state that it's in, so heavily polarized. I think that would be a frightening specter. It would open up the door to all kinds of changes that could create problems. So through the congressional approach, how do you expect to cajole the Congress to cut their own money hose?
Yeah, it's the essential question, John. What is the strategy for actually getting the votes? And so what happened, like all political strategies, I think it's always a good assumption to assume elected officials will do what's in their interest. And so this isn't about a naive sense that they'll just, listen to our arguments and decide on that basis. We have to, number one, change the conditions back home, so that they have a risk of losing their election if they're not for this. So most of our work is not actually in Washington, even though our focus is on 2/3 of Congress. Most of the work is actually in localities and states. Let me give you one example. Green Bay, Wisconsin. We want Mike Gallagher's vote. He's a Republican representative from Green Bay, Wisconsin, Marine Corps veteran, sort of a young reformer on the right, very concerned about influence of China and other countries in our elections. We've had very good conversations with him, but the reason we have very good conversations with him is we have amazing volunteers in Green Bay, and they're people who vote Republican, and people he listens to. They're Rotary presidents, they're business leaders, they're fellow veterans. And so we've had a lot of, we have presentations at Rotaries, we do business events, we do, tailgating at the Packers game, we do all kinds of stuff in that district. And let me tell you what that's led to. They went to the Brown County Election Board. Brown County is the county that Green Bay is in Wisconsin. Brown County voters voted for Mitt Romney over Barack Obama, Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump over Joe Biden in the last 3 elections. So how did we do there? 92% yes on the resolution supporting this amendment that was introduced in the Brown County legislature. Mike Gallagher's got to look at that. When he goes home and he hears about it at the Packers game, he hears about it at the farmers market, he hears about it at the Legion Hall, he hears about it at the Chamber of Commerce, and then he hears about it from Brown County legislators who said, well, hey, we voted for this, Mike. We need your vote too. We're going to get his vote. But we don't want him and expect him to do it alone. We're going to have to do that in other key states. And that's why we're in places where the votes are going to come from, working to change the conditions on the ground and make it in their interest to vote for this, in their interest to vote for it. That's the key.
92%, that's quite a number. We're going to go to Elena in Rhode Island, who has a question about whether there might be a legal approach to what you're trying to accomplish, Jeff. Go ahead, Elena.
Hi, I'm sitting cooking while I'm doing this, multitasking. Hi there. First of all, I must say that I'm in another organization, and about 1.5 years ago, I do think the most important issue is money in politics. I think that is a huge, I agree 100%. And I suggested, why don't we try to do a constitutional amendment? And you wouldn't believe how, people were saying, "Are you crazy? Do you realize how long that would take?" And I said, "I don't know. I just think that would be a great idea, and get the states involved." And anyway, so I'm so psyched that you were doing this. But having said that, I didn't realize that so many Republicans were behind this. So, at that point, is there a way that there could be a case that could be brought through the courts that could go to the Supreme Court? They don't mind overturning decisions. So I was wondering have you thought of that as a parallel course of action?
Elena, thank you. And someone at American Promise, Alan or otherwise, is going to put americanpromise.net into the chat and copy and paste that and send it to your friend who said, "Are you crazy? That's going to take..." And you give that to them and say, it'll go a lot faster if you sign up right here. And we have every intention of getting this done, not 20 years from now, not even 10 years from now, but now. So it's game on. So thank you. Hey, I'm a litigator. I spent my life, too much of my life, not all of it, in courtrooms. That Montana story we talked about at the outset, I was practicing law. I'd done a brief in the Citizens United case. I was out in Montana to help, the Attorney General defend Montana's anti-corruption laws that had stood for 100 years. That was the litigation strategy. I remember we launched American Promise in 2015, and law professors who shall remain nameless, but I've got a list, said, "Oh, you don't need to do that. We're going to elect Hillary Clinton, and she's going to appoint Supreme Court justices, and we're going to overturn Citizens United, yada, yada, yada." I said, "I hope you had a plan B." And if we had that strategy, I would dearly love it. Actually, I have to amend that. I once would have loved that. I actually think we have to do this because it's the only way that's going to work. But I also think it is the better way to do it. We don't
Okay.
need a 5-4 decision. We don't need more divisive fights in the Supreme Court when we have 90% support among the American people. We need the American people to demonstrate again that we're capable of big, huge things in this country, and we're capable of putting the country first and showing our politicians, showing our judges the pathway actually out of this darkness. I don't think the Supreme Court does that. I think we do that. So I actually think it's a problem that the Supreme Court isn't amenable to re-examining their mistake, but it's actually a good problem because it gives us the opportunity to kind of be that we're going to look back on this in 10 years and just see, oh, those were the things that did it, you know?
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, and Elena, if I could chime in, you should remind them that George Washington and Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King were a little bit crazy in terms of what they
All right. Hey,
were
well, sign
setting
me
out
up.
to change.
I will help you in Rhode Island. You know, you're not that far in Massachusetts, but I will help you in Rhode Island.
All right.
By
Yeah,
the time-
we've got some active people in Rhode Island. Sign up,
Oh.
offer to volunteer. We'll connect. There's a place to do that. We'll connect you up with our Rhode Island team.
All right, great.
All right, we're going to Bruce Wilder, who has a question about going back to this whole idea of a constitutional convention. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. The Article 5 is, as I understand it, is silent on how a convention is to be structured. And to me, that's critical. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear, Bruce.
I'm going to try to show you my picture, but I don't not seem to be working. Anyway, so I think that's critical. And while you were talking in the other, again, is it going to be each state with equal representation, or is it going to be based on a roughly equal number of population of voters per delegate?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And Congress probably has the authority to make that determination, since if the states apply for a convention, Congress, I think, has that authority.
Yeah.
Different view, but the worst thing that can happen, I think, is if the states have equal representation, and there is an organization who wants to have a so-called convention of states, which is Rick Santorum has been kind of promoting this, and I think that would be a bad thing, and I think we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
can I just
oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I can speak to that. Go ahead.
raise one other question that I was thinking about? Why could not Congress authorize a referendum on a draft of your amendment?
Yeah. Okay.
It may not have the force of, let's say it's 75%. It may not have the force to satisfy Article 5, but it would create tremendous pressure, I think, on the states and on the Congress to ratify.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Bruce. I know we're near the end of the hour, so I'll just try to quickly touch on them. Absolutely. There's a lot of lack of clarity around the convention rules. So nobody knows what will happen. That's why I think it was Steve and some others expressed concern about that pathway. That's what, frankly, we're not going to have a convention, in my view. We are focused on the vote in Congress. Convention pushing has always been part of the dynamic in an amendment time, but Congress has always been the one that proposed the amendment. It's why we haven't ever had a convention since Philadelphia 1787. So I don't think we will now. But as I say, we don't get in the weeds of arguing about that. We just full speed ahead. So we'll have Congress do it with a vote to propose the amendment. Then it gets ratified in the states. Congress doesn't have the constitutional authority to do a national referendum, but we do think that's a good idea to give ways for the people to speak up and just debate and decide where they stand on this amendment. So I mentioned Brown County. There's been nearly 1,000 cities and towns that have done resolutions. Wow. And they all passed by 80%. It's 90%. So, you can do that in your town. 22 states have passed resolutions calling for this amendment. 6 of them were by referendum, 6 ballot initiatives. We've never lost one. So, if you're interested in helping out, as I said to Cynthia sign up at AmericanPromise.net, and referenda and resolutions are definitely a piece of the strategy.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to all the questions, but we're out of time. I apologize to anyone there's a number of you who submitted questions I couldn't get to. But Jeff, thank you for taking the hour. This has been a great conversation. I want to encourage everyone to go to AmericanPromise.net and sign up, get connected to this. It's all part of one movement to return power to the American people. That's what Open Primaries is. That's what American Promise is. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, John. Thanks to everybody.
Take care.